Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. I'm very excited today. She's a longtime actress, two-time Emmy-nominated actress, and she's got this cool thing that she's been doing recently that we're going to really dig into today. And it is my honor to introduce to you director, producer, actor. Like I said, you name it, she's done it all. Miss Lee Purcell. And Lee, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me on. It's my pleasure.
So, Lee, first thing I want to ask you is the pandemic affected so many people. And when it happened, all we could do at the time was stay home. You know, we might be able to go out to go to the grocery store, but it seemed like the whole world shut down a lot. And in a lot of ways, that affected yourself and so many other actors, actresses, writers, whatever, producers. And they really had to, you know, regroup and be innovative about stuff. And you were one of those who really made the virtual way of TV really evolve. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your interest in it. It has been an interesting journey.
So basically, you had to really evolve, and you and your team came up with this innovative way of really, in a lot of ways, making Zoom a part of TV, which Zoom can do a lot of things for people. It really helps, especially for people. A lot of more people are working from home now because they could just log on to Zoom. But you really turned Zoom into Hollywood, which is pretty neat. So talk about that a little bit.
Thank you, Mike. I'm always excited about it. So we have a group. It's called Hollywood Radio Players, but it's produced by my partner Michael Carnegie's company, Two Fat Dogs Entertainment. Yeah. And I have one of those fat dogs right here next to me, and Michael has the other. And so what happened was that prior to the pandemic, there was a group of us. We were affiliated with another group, and we were performing live, doing recreating classic radio plays from the golden age of radio. And then the pandemic hit, and then all live theater was shut down, and we were just like shocked, and we were dazed and confused. We didn't know what to do. And so we were, and at the same time, though, it was kind of interesting, all of our industry charities, there are three major ones, and the one that I have been volunteering with for quite a long while, which is the Motion Picture and Television Fund, was the one that I was closest affiliated with. And they were really, all three charities are really scrambling for funding. So at the same time that we were wondering, like, well, what do we do now? Because nobody really wanted to just sit around. But then also because of, we have three major industry charities, and the one that I'm affiliated with, which is Motion Picture and Television Fund, because I'm a union activist, and I was already working with them in a totally different area. But we were all talking, and we started, so I'm going to go back and forth between these two things that happened. So we were all talking about, well, nobody just wants to sit home and do nothing. And because we're performers, we don't want to do that. And, you know, we couldn't do a film or a television show, and we couldn't perform live. So we just didn't want to sit around and learn how to crochet or something. So not that there's anything wrong with crocheting. My grandmother crocheted, but I don't do it, and neither did anybody else. And so we said, well, let's start doing shows on Zoom, because we were very accustomed to Zoom for business meetings, like everybody. And we would have our monthly meetings and on Zoom, but then this whole thing has kind of a trail. A friend of mine was doing kind of an early an early version of performing on Zoom, not like what we do, but really fun. And it was a parody of a soap opera and the characters were actors who couldn't go to the studio. And so, like, what do soap opera actors do when they can't go to the studio? And so it's about their lives, and it was all fictitious. It was very funny. And I looked at that and I thought, maybe we could do something not like that, but maybe we could use that medium of Zoom, but do our recreated classic radio plays. And so we started doing that. It was very difficult because we were doing things that I don't know if anybody's ever done these things before, maybe in a different way, but we wanted to do it more than just people sitting around a kitchen table reading. We wanted to do it with real performances, with special effects, with sound effects, with costumes as best as we could create out of our own closet. It was really kind of like, your dad has a barn, let's put on a show, the old saying. And so we started doing that, and they were rough. At first they were quite rough, and it was quite a learning curve because it's like, oh, well, where do you look? And how do you do this? And what about the sound? And we can't do live sound effects because that's what we have been doing in person, but we can do virtual sound effects and virtual special effects. So little by little, we started doing these shows. And then jumping back to MPTF simultaneously, there was a lot of suffering going on and people not having, money for basic needs, and like all across the world. But since we deal with our industry, I looked to the organization that I was working with, Motion Picture and Television Fund, otherwise known as MPTF, and said, why don't we somehow do these shows? Because it's the best thing to do, is to benefit our peers. And why don't we do these shows and ask for donations to MPTF, directly to MPTF. Nothing comes to us ever. It goes directly to MPTF. And we did that. And that's been quite wonderful to help people out. And then, the pandemic was slowing down a bit, and it's like, oh, thank goodness, And then we are on strike. And it was first, we didn't know if DGA was Directors Guild of America, if they were going to strike. They didn't. WGA did strike 148 days. And then they finally settled. And then we are in our 100 and I think it's 12 days, I think. And we're all kind of cautiously optimistic at this point, but we don't know. We don't know. But I am cautious just because we get updates every night from the negotiating team as to exactly what has happened that day, and so we're cautiously optimistic, and which is great, which is really great. And we will continue to raise money for MPTF because that's what we want to do. And Michael Carnegie, my producing partner, who has the other fat dog, he and I agree that whatever we do in the future, because we are in an evolution now with our organization, Two Fat Dogs Entertainment, and whatever we do, we will benefit MPTF.
Lee, one of the things, as I've gotten older, there's things. Change always happens, and there's some things I like about change, there's some things I don't. But I got to be honest about this, that Zoom is really, like I said, allowed so much more creativity for so many people like myself doing shows.
Oh, yeah.
Musicians, things like that, actors, sports. I mean, when the pandemic was going on, I mean, they were able to continue to talk about baseball and football, things like that. So it's amazing just how much Zoom, StreamYard, all these sites have really taken off because they've kind of given us the ability to be more, like I said, more creative and really continue to grow in what we do.
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful thing. You know, what started out, I'm just gonna, I know we're on StreamYard, which is a great platform, but we work on, well, right now we're working on Zoom, and then we have actually been discussing for our future upcoming endeavor, should we switch? And we haven't decided yet, but it has been quite a boon for a lot of people, a lot of industries. What started out as a way to have remote meetings has turned into this wild creative uh, facility for so many different, like you pointed out, for sports, or, you know, for music, and for performers like us. And that's been, it's great. I don't think anybody ever saw that coming. No, it was like, these were just like corporate business meeting platforms. And now, you know, here we are, you know, on this one, and it's been really an interesting evolution, really interesting. And we were alive for it. I mean, that's nice.
And the thing is, Lee, is that while you were able to continue doing something you love by, like I said, doing it virtually, I'm
Yeah.
somebody like yourself who was working all the time and you're very motivated and you have that, you know, feeling every day of wanting to do something. There had to be a part of you that was very depressed during this pandemic, because that kind of took a lot of that away from you. Now, again, you know, we have our health and we have to be thankful for that. But I
Oh,
mean, for the first time in probably since you've been working, this was probably a long layoff for you that you just really weren't used to. So that had to really be an adjustment.
I really think it was an adjustment for everyone, no matter what you do. It was an adjustment. I remember the first part of the pandemic, like everybody does, and it was, uh, we didn't know what to do. It was confusing. It was scary. I remember getting on the freeway. I was the only driver on the freeway in Los Angeles. Mine was the only car. And it was like, my gosh, this is Armageddon. This is the apocalypse. I mean, this is awful.
Yeah.
And, you know, and for a while though, it was, you know, because you had to go out and of course your mask and wear gloves and be so cautious, right? But for a while it was kind of fun to drive around because there was no traffic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like, wow. And the skies cleared up. And it was quite interesting. But then, you know, it hits you. It's like, how long is this going to go on? Who's going to survive it?
Yeah.
How many people? How many people are we going to lose? You know, what shape are people going to be in? And you know, like everything, it evolved and people got smart, and but it was, because I had done a movie right before the pandemic, like literally finished it, I think within weeks. And then it was like, oh, now what? And then my husband and I had tickets, plane tickets, and hotels and everything to go to Europe in March. And I was watching the news, and when because I used to live in Europe, and I know it quite well. And when I saw that the Louvre had just shut down, I said, "We got to cancel the tickets." He's like, "Why?" I said, "Because if the Louvre in Paris has shut down, which is the beautiful big pyramid part of it, is the Glass Pyramid Museum, then everything else is going." And sure enough, bam. And so really doing our classic radio plays and really kept all of us in our group sane and able to still exist on what is all of our purposes, which is to perform and to entertain people. And it really, I think, helped us. It really helped us all because we were constantly creating shows, constantly.
Yeah.
And learning and facing these huge technological obstacles and trying to figure things out and trying to get past this learning curve. And I mean, there's no way I wouldn't have done something. I would have written a book, or I don't know, I would have written a screenplay. I would have done something because it's just what I do. But I was thankful that we had the platform and we had the people and we had experience, all of us very experienced, to look at this and go, okay, this is a mountain. Let's make it into a molehill.
Yeah.
And we did. And so consequently, when you go to our website, HollywoodRadioPlayers.com, or you look on our YouTube channel, Hollywood Radio Players, then you can see the fruits of our efforts. And then, of course, we've also continued, past the pandemic. It was just the pandemic was, we turned it into an opportunity, rather than everybody doing nothing, because none of us really have that in our personalities. As you know, you don't. And so you can see all of our different shows. And then Michael and I are continuing, but we're evolving, and we now have Two Fat Dogs Entertainment, and we've just done all kinds of things. It was a curse that got turned into a blessing.
Yeah, it really was. And one of the ones that I really enjoyed watching, of course, and it was a big one for you, and you produced and directed it, was the War of the Worlds. And what's cool about that is, I mean, I think that came out around 1937 or 1938. It was PBS radio, and it was just so cool to watch it. And I'm thinking to myself at first, and I'll be honest, I said, I wonder if this is going to be boring because it's on Zoom. But man, the sound effects, everything that went into it, and I felt like I was really watching a movie from 1938. I really did. It was
thank you.
It brings you back. So talk about that one, because that one was really good. And I mean, that was the start of just so many more that you would do that were so well done.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that, because that one, which was, it's a huge show, no matter how you look at it. Even if you just did it for radio and you couldn't see it, it's a huge show. And it's legendary. It just turned, I think 2 days ago, 85 years old.
Yeah.
So, wow. And all the iterations that have come from that, the feature films, the TV series, there's even an opera. All these different iterations, because War of the Worlds is just, it's a cultural moment. I wanted to do it for a long time. I wanted to do it live, and nobody wanted to. It was just like, no, my gosh, we can't do that. It's too big. It's like, oh, it's huge. And then when we started doing the Zoom shows, I said, I'm going to do War of the Worlds. It was like, no, oh no, don't do War of the Worlds. Oh yeah, we're going to do War of the Worlds. And I'm going to direct it. And everybody went, oh, good, because it's too hard. And we worked on that for a long time. And I did a huge amount of research on it, and cast it. And, we did the costumes as best as we could. We didn't have our great costume designer, Sean LeBlanc, at the time. We got him much, much later. We only got him recently. So it was kind of like, well, what do you have in your closet? And what do you have in your closet? And how do we do this? And to top it off, I don't know if this is in the material you were sent, but I had worked with Orson Welles as a very, very young actress. It was, I think, my second job, and it was not a good movie, and I didn't care. It was Orson Welles.
Yeah, yeah.
I had studied Orson Welles and War of the Worlds and Citizen Kane and the Magnificent Ambersons and so forth in film school. And I didn't care if we were doing a dog food commercial. It was Orson Welles. And I was like 19 or something. And I didn't care. And actually there's some really good actors in that movie, even though the movie is not good. But some really good actors are in that movie and came out of that movie and became, some of them, lifelong friends of mine.
Yeah.
Because we worked with Orson Welles. I mean, that's a rare thing to be able to say, unless you're 95. And there are, I mean, we are like a unique bunch of people that we got to work with Orson. And for me in particular, because in the movie, even though not the best movie I've ever done, but in the movie, Orson played a warlock, which is a male witch, and I played his protege, young witch.
And yeah, love that. I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh. And then there was The Coven. I mean, it was not a good movie, but very nice people involved in it. And we all have, stories about, yeah, I worked with Orson Welles. And it's like, what? He's been deceased for a very long, yeah, I was young and he was old. And so I was such a huge fan of Orson's, and always before I ever met him. And then especially after I worked with him, because he was kind, and he was really decent. And even though he was treated like a king and we were treated like the peasants, literally like the peasants, I didn't care. It was like Orson Welles. I can't say that enough. I got to work with Orson Welles, and I wish it'd been a better movie, wish it'd been a better script, but I got to work with Orson Welles. So I can say that over and over. I've been pretty lucky. And I can't say the name of the movie, because of strike, because the union strike restrictions. It has had at least 5 names, and has been re-edited over and over, and I don't even know what it looks like anymore. And it doesn't really matter. So when I wanted to do War of the Worlds with Hollywood Radio Players, I wanted to do it as an homage to Orson.
Right.
And then if you see the show, I do talk about this. I have a little intro in the beginning where I talk about how I knew Orson, and then I talk about, there's in the research I did, long and hard research on War of the Worlds, and dispelled a lot of the things that I had been told, and they weren't true. And there's a big mythology around War of the Worlds that when they did it, which was on Halloween night or October 31st, I can't remember which right now, but that supposedly people got so scared that millions of people ran out into the streets. People, unfortunately, took their own lives. People, all this mythology. And a lot of it, I found it wasn't true. Because what is very interesting when you are a radio nerd, as I am, and then you learn more. And at that time, how we have the Nielsen ratings now for network television, and it tells you how many people watch that show, and then that brings in advertisers if you have enough, and so forth. At that time, they had a rating system Don't remember the name of it anymore, but they had a rating system for radio, because radio was it. There was no television. There was no streaming. There were stage plays. If you were lucky enough to live near a city that had a nice theater, and there were movies, and there was radio. That was it. The three storytelling mediums. There was nothing else. So they did have this rating system, and so they knew and they had lots of channels, lots, and families would gather around these big, beautiful pieces of furniture that held the radio, and would also hold like the record player and then the vinyl records, but it was built for the radio. And they would gather around on a Saturday night or whatever, and they would listen to stories. And so on that particular night of 1938, people were gathered around. But the show that was getting, the station that was getting the most ratings was not that particular station or that particular show. Because War of the Worlds played on Mercury Theater, which was Orson and John Houseman's creation. I also knew John Houseman when I was very young. And they did lots of different shows, lots of them. And War of the Worlds, of course, was the biggest. It was the biggest radio show in history. But on the other station, it's two coincidences. On the other station was playing the most popular radio show in the country, which was Charlie McCarthy, who was a mannequin.
Yeah.
Big mannequin that would sit on the ventriloquist's lap, or being held by the ventriloquist, who was Edgar Bergen. And that was the most popular show in the country, the Charlie McCarthy and Edgar Bergen show. And so that was playing right opposite War of the Worlds.
Yeah.
And so not the Nielsen ratings, but the ratings at that time, the statistics prove that there were far more people listening to Charlie McCarthy than to War of the Worlds. But then, as now, people tended to channel surf. And so some people never listened to War of the Worlds, and some people came in the middle when it was at the very dark point, when the Martians were, killing Earthlings and doing horrible things, and they did not hear Orson's opening disclaimer,
right,
where he said, ladies and gentlemen, this is our Halloween show. It's just a show, and so forth. They didn't hear that. And they also didn't hear, like in the break, in the intermission, he said it again. They didn't hear that. So those people, that kind of smallish audience, who happened to come in the middle, who left the Bergen McCarthy show, they got scared. And I've actually met not those exact people, but their descendants, who said, "Oh yeah, my grandmother told me that they ran because they thought the Martians were coming down the street."
Right.
And so, but it wasn't millions of people. It was only the smallish audience that happened to come into War of the Worlds and not hear the disclaimers that Orson said, because he was actually quite careful. But at the same time, such an interesting time period. At the same time, you had William Randolph Hearst, who, newspapers were it. There was no internet. You got your news from the radio or from newspapers, and newspapers were very powerful. I know you're into history, so I know that you know this, but a lot of people don't. But newspapers, because now we have like these little flimsy whatever's left newspapers, but at that time, if you were a newspaper publisher, you had power.
Yeah.
And Hearst was he was the biggest newspaper publisher, and he hated radio because it was taking business away from the newspapers. They could see their revenues going down because of radio was also doing news. And he hated radio. And he hated Orson Welles because Orson Welles was very popular. At the same time he did War of the Worlds and Mercury Theater, he was a wildly successful Broadway producer. He had 2 or 3 Broadway hits playing at the same time that War of the Worlds was done. So he was a powerhouse. He's 27 years old.
Yeah.
And Hearst hated him because he considered that Orson was one of his enemies because Orson was successful in radio. And so he had Hearst had his minions. He talk about spin. He did the ultimate spin. Hearst did. He had his printers, stay up all night and do these headlines that were like I'm trying to show you how big, like this, right?
Yeah.
Tall. And in those days, it was called above the fold. You wanted your hot news above the fold of the newspaper because newspapers were folded, and if you would look on a newsstand, then whatever it was above the fold was what would get people to buy the newspaper. But the headlines were so big that half of the letters were above the fold and the other half was below the fold. They were so big, right? But he really played it up. He really spun it. And it was really him that created this mythology that millions of people ran into the street, hundreds of thousands died. He really did a bad thing. And he blamed it all on Orson. And you can read the newspapers from the time, and it says things like, Orson Welles is responsible for the deaths of all these people. It was simply professional jealousy on Hearst's part. Okay, cut to about 2-3 years later. Guess what movie came out? Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
So that was Orson's way because he based it on Hearst.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was Orson's way of getting back at Hearst for defaming him terribly, right, and blowing this whole thing out of proportion and scaring people. So he did Citizen Kane as his revenge movie, which then of course became one of the most revered movies in cinematic history. And so he got his. And I find that to be and then he of course played Hearst, named Kane, but played Hearst. So I just find all these facts fascinating, just fascinating. And this is one of the reasons that I like doing classic radio, because the history is amazing. And there's more, and there's other reasons I could really go on forever and bore you to death.
Oh, you're not boring me. I assure you that this stuff is so neat to listen to. It's so refreshing. But and the thing of it is too about Orson Welles is it was important for you to make sure that film was dedicated in his honor, because you really felt like, he was really a pioneer if you think about it, especially in radio. And I thought that was a great job of you paying tribute to him. And I just look at so many other of these, and I'm so fascinated, like Dragnet, Father Knows Best, our Miss Brooks, which is really cool. And I'm watching this stuff and I'm saying to myself, God, this is like a new way of watching stuff that I used to watch in reruns and stuff like that, or films.
Yes.
Kind of reinventing it, but you're still keeping it the same. It's just a Zoom way of doing it. And I think it's so phenomenal and just remarkable of what you and Michael and everybody is doing. This is just awesome.
Oh, thank you. We really, really appreciate that, because we we love it, so, and we are going to keep doing it, evolving it, but we're going to keep doing it in some form or another. And another reason that we really love doing it, I mean, there's so many reasons, but is that a lot of people, and here's the interesting thing about our audiences, is that we have people of all ages. And we find that we didn't see that coming, right? We actually really didn't think about who's going to watch these. We just wanted to do them, right? And then later on, it was like people are watching these, and we're like, oh, that's great. They're probably like really old people who were around, but I mean, sorry, who's really around now? Who was around then? I mean, some, yeah, and we actually have a person who's performed with us who's in his 90s, and he actually did radio when it was the golden age, and boy, does he have stories. So, but one of the reasons is we feel like the TV and streaming industries owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to radio, because a lot of you just named off a whole bunch of them, right? A lot of the original early TV shows, even into the 60s, were radio dramas, radio comedies, there were radio sitcoms. Almus Brooks was a sitcom, radio sitcom, very popular. And I got to play her, and that was really fun to try to be Miss Brooks, Eve Arden. And so through doing this, we, because we know hundreds of these shows, and a huge percentage of successful television and television stars came out of radio. Lucille Ball.
Yeah.
She did My Favorite Husband, which was the precursor to I Love Lucy. And then she got to do I Love Lucy on early television.
I think I Love Lucy was the first TV sitcom ever. If I stand correct, I could be wrong, but I think it was the first TV sitcom as far as comedy went.
I would have to research that. That is and I am going to, because I don't think so, but I am going to. Let me just think for a minute. I know that, like, the first Westerns also came from radio.
Yeah.
And, Gunsmoke, which you can still see on, I don't know, MeTV or something, today. And, but Gunsmoke is very interesting because William Conrad, who played, and for those people listening who don't know what Gunsmoke was, it was a Western, and it was wildly popular, and it ran for
20 years.
Yeah, 20 years, right? But it came from radio.
Yeah.
And whereas in the television show, Marshall Dillon was played by James Arness quite wonderfully, but in the radio show, which was very popular, he was played by William Conrad, who had this spectacular, deep, basso profundo voice. And
talented too, let me tell you. I mean,
well,
William was very talented too, let me tell
very
you.
talented. I worked with him when I was a real young actress. And I was lucky because I came along at a time in the beginning of my career, which was the end of a lot of people's careers. They were winding down, of people I got to work with who were legends. And he was one of them. But so when early television came along and they wanted to make the transition of Gunsmoke, which may have been the first Western, not sure, into television, they couldn't use William Conrad. They refused to. In fact, they didn't use any of that cast, but particularly Bill Conrad, because he was a short and very heavy man. And to them, he did not look like a lawmaker in the Old West or a sheriff in the Old West. And which is kind of, I don't know, it's kind of biased, but they wanted your classic, John Wayne type. And so they kept doing the radio show. They were doing these two shows, the radio show of Gunsmoke and the TV show of Gunsmoke simultaneously, but with completely different casts.
Right.
And so they were looking for who would play Marshall Dillon on the television show. And they asked John Wayne, and he said no. But he said, I know a young fella who would be great. And that was James Arness. And they hired James Arness because John Wayne had recommended him. So I think that we owe, those of us who work in television and streaming, I think we have and I don't think anybody much knows it, but we have this tremendous debt of gratitude to classic radio, because so many shows came out of classic radio and built the foundation for the TV and the streaming industry as we know today. YouTube is a form of streaming, not like the big boys are, but it is a form of streaming, and I'm on it, you're on it, and we do owe a debt of gratitude to radio, to classic golden age of radio, for those shows that are the ancestors of so many shows. So that's another reason that we really like doing this is because to educate people, like, where do you think all this came from? Came from radio.
Yeah.
And let's show radio, classic radio, which doesn't exist anymore. Thank you.
Yeah. And the thing about what you're doing right now too, and you mentioned radio, is that's like another option you have when you're driving in your car. You could just put on this great thing that you're doing and listen to the different shows that you've already produced. And you're trying at night, like, you're laying down and you want to sleep, and instead of listening to music when you sleep, you could listen to these shows, and it kind of really relaxes you. And I think that's what it gives people. It gives them something different in every day of their life. They could utilize this in so many ways with what you and Michael and everybody is doing. I mean, and that's what I really like about it too, because it's great to see it on YouTube and watch it, but you could also listen to it too, and you could kind of paint the picture in your head of what it's like. So I really think that it's just such a very, like I said, I don't want to keep sounding like a broken record, but it's so refreshing to have this type of access.
Thank you. That's really nice of you to say that, because one of the reasons we're going to be evolving and expanding into something else that I'll talk about in a minute, a little bit, is what you just said, is that I had because our audiences are everybody from really small children, up to, because our shows are family friendly.
Yeah.
So, parents can feel safe and letting small children watch our shows. And, but then all the way up through, senior citizens, everybody can watch the show. I had what I would call a Gen Xer come up to me and say, "Oh, I really love your shows." I'm like, "You do?" And yeah, I really love your shows, but I want to ask you, I want to listen to them more when I'm driving, and it's kind of like awkward to do, but could you do them as a podcast? And which was something that Michael and I have been discussing, because Michael and I, we exec produce all the shows. We We really do everything. And then, you know, we bring in the actors or we do the acting ourselves, whatever. And so I told her, I said, you know, we have been discussing that, but that is something that your generation would like. She said, yeah, because podcasts are our radio. If you can hear a story,
Yeah.
that's different. And our shows are anywhere from, I think our shortest one is like 18 minutes up to over an hour. I mean, they really vary. We're trying to be more cognizant of that and keep them around 30, 35 minutes. But it's really hard because we're not writing these shows. You know, we're using original scripts. And so, and there's hundreds or thousands of them. But so we're trying to be more aware of how long is this show, because we add so many things to them that the show does get longer.
Yeah.
Because of the special effects and the sound effects, and then our intros. I do want to talk about our fabulous hosts.
Yeah.
So our wonderful host, Tom Bergeron, did about the first eight episodes, 7, 8, I think 8. And then he got a gig that I can't talk about.
Yeah.
So, but then we got lightning struck twice. We got the wonderful, beautiful Lisa Gibbons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who is amazing. I mean, they're both Emmy winners. You know, they're both incredibly skilled at what they do. And I know how hard it is because I had to do it for one show and it was just awful. It's just not what I do. And it was terrible.
She does it.
Huh?
She does it effortlessly too. Like
effortlessly. Both of them just
yeah. Yeah.
Like it's just amazing. And you know, I write the ones for Lisa and then say, I don't care what you do with it, whatever you want to do is fine. And she'll make some changes, and they're always better because they're both, you know, Tom and Lisa both very, very skilled, and also pleasant and sweet, both of them, and nice. And there's no angst. They're just pros. And so we've been very fortunate to have these two wonderful hosts. And then I have to talk about our wonderful costumer, who, like I mentioned earlier, is new to us, and not new, but new to us. And we were amazingly fortunate because we decided that because we keep upgrading and evolving and changing. And, you know, when we became a union signatory, that was a big, big step. And then we wanted to get a guild costumer, the Costumer Designers Guild. And so we got unbelievably lucky. And Sean LeBlanc, who is a costumer of decades and has a huge costume house of which we just have free reign. We can just go look around from, you know, the 4th century to the 21st century and just and he's also, which is really great, he's an historian like we are. And we can talk. The first time I ever talked to him, we never shut up for 3 hours. We just were talking history and costume history and film history, and so he's perfect for us. So we just keep changing and growing and expanding, and then our next stage will be coming soon, and we really have a good time.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like everybody gets along well too. And I mean, so far you've done 11 episodes, correct?
11. Yeah, 11.
And the current episode right now is it's episode 11. And I mean, you just think about it. This is just something that's going to continue to grow and grow. And I really believe that even though you accomplished so much before you ever did this, this is going to be right up there as probably top 3 things you've ever done in your life as far as an actor, writer, producer, director. I mean, it's got to be right there for you.
Well, thank you. It is certainly different than anything I've done before, except for I was affiliated with another group called the Green River Roping and Reciting Preservation Society Players, which we did, and that was a number of years ago. But we also performed live, and our shows were huge, though. They got to be very big. We did authentic Western poetry, but not country and Western, authentic from like 1865, around after the Civil War, when the West changed and there was a huge change and the cattle drives started and so forth. And we did authentic Western poetry from that era, and we did authentic music, and we had ropers, and it was just, it got to be, it just grew and grew and grew and grew. And then eventually, and we had very well-known actors in that. And we had a guest chair, and Sam Shepard performed with us. And we just had a tremendous group of actors, Melissa Gilbert and Bruce Boxleitner and, oh my gosh, James Gammon and Lita Brew, the whole thing was his idea. And he came to me because we were all horse people and very into Westerns and so forth. And it was his idea. And he said, let's do this. And I said, yeah. And so I was producing with him and co-directing and we performed at places that this other group, the classic radio group, has performed at. So it's kind of an offshoot, kind of a revisiting of what I did at that time, and which is 25 years ago. But that was fabulous. It was so much fun. But this is different because now this has evolved and is evolving as we speak into something different. And so it's very satisfying, to do this. And I can't say enough good things about my partner, Michael Carnegie. And if you watched War of the Worlds, you see him, he plays Orson.
Oh,
yeah. And I cast him because of everybody who could potentially play Orson. I knew that he could do it because he's gifted with voices. And then he also plays because a lot of times we play 2 or more roles in a show. And he also plays the kind of random knife brandishing crazy guy, and he was really completely different. And so anyway, that's my producing partner. And he's also a technical expert, which I am okay with technology, but not like him. He's really good at it. And he's a great editor. And so I don't have to physically do the editing. I'm a trained editor, but not a digital editor. Yeah. And so he's really good. He's really good at anything he puts his mind to. So we have a really excellent partnership. We really speak the same language, creatively, and have the same ambitions. And so and our spouses get along, and
yeah,
you can't beat that. And we both have one dog, and so 2 fat dogs entertainment. And so I can't say enough good things about him. And then there are just thousands of these shows because the golden age went from really like 1928 to the late 40s. It started waning in the early 50s when TV started grabbing more of those audiences, but it did go on into the 60s, which is interesting to me because television was really big, but you did have radio. But eventually what happened with classic radio in the golden age, eventually what happened was that there was this trade-off that television took the sitcoms and the dramas and all the scripted shows, and TV took, because there were game shows that were big on classic radio, and sports was huge.
Oh, yeah.
And news was huge. So there was this kind of trade-off that radio would keep news, sports, but not the dramas and the comedies and the game shows. Those all went to TV. And it's interesting because Michael and I both trained as actors in London. We did not know each other at the time, and we trained at different times. But he got just obsessed with radio from listening to Star Wars on the radio.
Yeah.
And I became obsessed with radio dramas, comedies, because of living in London, listening to the BBC.
Yeah.
And these were not reruns. And then I went back for several years and taught acting in England. And every time I go back, I would go, oh, I wonder what's new on radio, because there are entire channels that are dedicated to new shows, new radio shows, not like here, where it's mainly, the old shows, the classic shows. And so it's a different culture, and different things appeal to different people. But that's how radio stayed afloat, was through the content that they kept. And that's how TV grew, was the content that they took.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really feel very strongly about the fact that we owe radio. We owe it. As artists, we owe it. But a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, I always say this, that whether I'm watching whatever it might be, somebody being interviewed on TV, or watching a sports interview on TV, or a movie interview, whatever, there's nothing quite like radio. When you hear it on radio, it's just, you feel like the dialogue is so much better. And that's why, like, radio to me will always, in my opinion, come first, and TV is slightly second. They're both right.
Oh, really?
I really believe that radio is just like having that picture and that sound, and getting to, like I said, paint the picture. That's really something that's the beauty of radio. And then in TV, they kind of come together. So I mean, radio, nobody should ever underrate just how impactful radio has been throughout the 20th and 21st century.
Oh, totally. And that's why we call ours Radio You Can See.
Yeah.
Because you see it. But the radio is always on in my house. It's always on in my car.
Yeah.
It's just that what I want to hear doesn't exist anymore. Which maybe we'll be taking care of that, But if you listen to, say, Sirius Radio, which is the subscription,
right? Satellite,
satellite. They do have some shows.
Yeah.
And things can change. Things are always evolving. Things are always changing. So we will see, but I do think we owe a debt of gratitude.
Yeah, we definitely
to radio and to Orson Welles.
Well,
he had another show called Mystery Theater, I think it was called, and they did over 1,000 shows.
Yeah,
one show.
He was a genius. He really was.
A genius.
A few people I wanted to bring up to you real quick. I don't want to keep you any longer, but
totally fine.
This woman that you worked with a couple times, and I always felt like she deserved an Emmy, and thankfully Daytime actually recognized her, but I always felt like she should have won a Primetime Emmy.
Who is that?
Still doing work, is Donna Mills. So talk about with Donna, because I always felt like she was one of the most underrated actresses that I've ever seen. She really was, and that's no knock at anybody, but she really was the heart and soul of Knots Landing during their run.
That's true. Donna's a wonderful actress, and she's a terrific person. And I think she's getting a lot of accolades and a lot of work right now. And she's 80,
83, I think, yeah.
Something. I mean, she's very open about it. We're not saying something that she doesn't say herself.
Right.
So, and she is working, and which is great, because ageism is alive and well. And but she's great. I know I worked with her in a project, and it was great working with her. She's very professional, very, very pleasant. And we had a funny road trip up to the mountains where we were shooting. Oh my gosh, should have been a fly on the wall. It was very funny. And then, of course, the other Donna, who is Donna Pescow,
yeah,
who was also in that project. And she's one of my closest friends. And she has, she's done very well in the projects that she's done. I just can't say the name of them. So, yeah. So we call them the two Donnas.
Yeah. And then of course, Lee, I mean, Steve McQueen, who was like your Hollywood mentor. I mean, he really was. I mean, phenomenal guy. Just talk about him a little bit.
Oh boy. Yeah. Steve McQueen, not the current fabulous director, also named Steve McQueen, but Steve McQueen, the legendary, iconic movie star. Look him up if you don't know who he was, which I would be shocked at. But but he changed my life like overnight. And I had grueling auditions for that project. I think I auditioned 5 times and started off with, it's all on the internet. You just look him and me up, and it's all there. But I think there was 500 young actresses, and they culled it, and then it was 250, and they culled it and culled it and culled it through all these auditions until there were 5 of us. And one was a friend of mine, and who has since left us. But it was interesting, because I always knew I would get that role. I knew it from day one. And I didn't even want to audition for it, because I was young and I had never done a film. And this was the female lead. And I had done some commercials. I was under contract to a particular studio, because they were doing kind of a revamped contract system, which was all different, not like the golden age where, actors were actually taken care of, abused, but taken care of. But we were just not taken very good care of. But it was okay. I mean, it was great to have it. It was great to have that, because you got a little bit of salary, and you got the opportunity to start working. And that particular show and that particular studio had signed me, but I had already started auditioning for this film. And so I had a clause put in my contract, which was a pretty gutsy thing to do for a basically young, starving actress to do. But I hadn't put it in there that if I got that film, that I could leave my contract with no penalties. And they did it, which was, I don't even know why they did it, and which was a miracle. And so I did it, and somewhere along the line, I think around my 3rd audition, I met Steve. Didn't know I was going to meet him, it was just a surprise. And it was okay because it's hard to imagine this now, but he was, to me, old. And I think he was 40. And I thought he was old, right? Because he was of my parents' generation. And so I wasn't in awe. I mean, I respected him, that's for sure. But I hadn't seen that many of his movies. And he was just like, an older actor that, I mean, he was the biggest movie star in the world.
Right.
At that time. He truly was. And, but I wasn't scared of him or anything because he was not of my generation. And so I got a call on a Saturday morning, I remember it very well, to come to the office. And I didn't live that far from his offices, and to come over. And I thought, because I knew I had this next audition coming, that I was going over to pick up some sides, which is what scenes are called, material out of the script that you audition with, sides. I don't know why they're called that. And so I said, and I was out in my yard, my tiny little yard, and I was digging. So I was dirty and sweaty and wearing old clothes. And I said, and I thought, they just want me to come over and pick up some sides. And so whoever called, I said, could I come over in an hour? Because I was truthful. I said, I'm pretty like dirty. I got dirt under my fingernails. And they said, no, you have to come now. And I was like, I thought, I guess they want to close the office because it's Saturday and they want to close early, and I'll just run in there real quick. Nobody will see me except for the secretary. And I'll just, kind of splash some water on my face, and I'll just go over to the office and pick up some sides, and I'll be out of there before anybody but the secretary, whom I knew by that point, sees me. And so I went over in my old beater car, and I just ran up the stairs and, yanked open the door, and there was Steve McQueen.
Wow.
And it was like, even though I wasn't scared or nervous because of, his being of the older generation, it was still a shock, to just open that door and is like, oh, hi. And he said, oh, hi, I'm Steve. And I went, I know. And I said, and I'm Lee. And he was like, let's talk. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even comb my hair. I just ran over there and wearing these old clothes. And I said, sure. I mean, yeah, and he said, come on back. And, we went back to his office. We talked for probably 3 hours, and just about everything, just the widest range of topics. And, I was, nobody. And we just talked about life and about viewpoints and what movies we liked. And we talked a lot about cars and motorcycles, because I had a motorcycle. I hadn't brought it over there. I just came up in my car, but I had a motorcycle. And of course, he had 50 motorcycles and lots of fabulous cars. And I loved fast cars. I just couldn't afford one yet. And so we talked about that, and music, and our upbringing and background. And I mean, his upbringing was eerily similar to my upbringing, not in the context of material goods, but in the context of a troubled background, and not having fathers, and so forth. And it was just like we just bonded.
Yeah.
It was just instant. I mean, it was like nothing romantic. That never ever occurred or came up, and he was married, talked about his kids, and anyway, it was just amazing. And then I had to go do the next however many auditions, 2, 3 auditions, and knowing I really wanted to work for this man, because I just felt like he was one thing brilliant, because he was, and a kindred spirit, and I really wanted to work for him, and I did. And then, the first call I got when I got the job was, I think, my agent, I think, and the second one was Steve,
Right.
and it was like, okay, now we work. I'm like, okay, and I would go to his office, and we'd talk, and then he wanted me to. I was really skinny, and he wanted me to gain weight, and he said, but I want you to gain it in muscle, not the wrong way. And I said, okay. And then he would work out with me and teach me workout routines. And then one day, you maybe have read this, I don't know, but one day he said to me, no, I said to him, how do you know all this? How do you know all these exercises? And he said, well, I have this this incredible Chinese guy who is, didn't call them fitness experts in those days. You called them, exercise teachers, things like that. Right. And he said, he's a martial arts guy and he knows just everything. And so, he teaches me and then I teach you. And I'm like, oh, okay. Never ask him his name.
Yeah.
And then years later, when I'm in my office, in my library, I have a bunch of books I'm in about Steve. And then years later, I was being interviewed and I told that little story. And the writer said, do you know who that was? And I said, no, it was just Steve's exercise teacher. And he said, it was Bruce Lee.
Oh, wow.
I was like, what? So I was taught by Bruce Lee by osmosis, by third hand, how to do these exercises, which some of them I still do. And, but I just learned so much from Steve. I just learned so much just about, because I really knew nothing, just nothing. I knew how to act.
Yeah.
And I knew how to dance. But I didn't know a lot about, how to be on a set. And I had taken a course, which was great because it was specifically for that. How to hit your marks and how to work the camera, how to work the light. Do not work with your hands, but as an actor. And so I knew those things, but I didn't know. And so he taught me, how to steal scenes. And because he was always doing that. And he taught me how to save money.
Right.
Just kind of life skills, because I didn't have anybody who'd ever taught me life skills. And so he did, because he knew I was like really, naive. And so it's a great and wonderful and treasured memory for me as to what he did for me. And then, of course, he introduced me to all the press in a massive press conference. And, it's just things like that you just don't forget, particularly your first.
Yeah.
I got a lot of press since then, a lot of press conferences, a lot of press tours, but your very first one, you don't forget, like your first love, you don't forget that. And I always remember walking into that room with him and just being blinded by flash bulbs going off, which in those days were flash bulbs, and being, walked to the front by Steve. And then just everything was just so wild from that point, just crazy wild.
Yeah.
And he was just right there, He was great. He was really he should have lived 40 more years. Should have.
And I mean, you can't ask for somebody better than that to learn the business and learn the aspects of it and things like that. So, I mean, those are the things that I know you're very grateful about, that the
Oh,
people over the years, the ones who influenced you and the
yeah.
ones who bought you and things like that. And I mean, that's what I think is most rewarding about your career. Yes, the accomplishments are great, the movies and films and things like that that you've done and what you're doing right now, but those relationships and the stuff that you learned from so many people, that's got to be, like I said, what's most rewarding.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it is, there were other people, nobody like Steve. I mean, nobody. But there were other people along the way. You always have people who help you, and you always have people who hurt you.
Yeah.
And I certainly had my share of both. And but I think because when your first employer is Steve McQueen, and then and then the next movie, you work with Orson Welles.
It's the best of both worlds.
I know it's kind of, it's kind of hard to be intimidated by anybody,
Yeah.
In the industry. I can be intimidated by other people, but not often though. But because I think when I was a child and I wanted to be a concert pianist, that was my whole thing. I was very, very young, like 7. And there was a concert pianist named Van Cliburn.
Yeah.
He very famous. And he was like, to me, he was like a rock star. And to a lot of people, he was like a rock star back in that time. And he had won the Russian competition. He beat the Russian, which was unheard of. And I was in an airport when I was about 7, and I was a piano student since I was 5, and had this big dream. I had a dream about a lot of different forms of art because I was really kind of like looking from a very young age. There was never any question that I was going to be a performing artist or a fine artist of some kind. I just didn't know quite what yet. So I was looking around and trying different things, and so I was in this airport in Memphis. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it's many years ago. And was there with my mother and my half sister. And I look across the room. We were sitting there having lunch or something, and I see Van Cliburn, like in person, my idol. And he was just all alone. And nobody was mobbing him or asking for autographs or anything. He was just quietly sitting there with his beautiful hands and having his lunch. And so I just got up, left the table, didn't tell my mother where I was going. It's not a good thing to do. And went over to Van Cliburn and introduced myself. I was 7.
Yeah.
And in a little frilly dress. And we were probably picking up my grandmother at the airport, would be my guess. And I introduced myself to him, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Lee Purcell, and I play piano too." And he didn't laugh at me. He probably should have. I'm talking to, at that time, the greatest concert pianist in the world, and I'm just a little 7-year-old piano student with a big dream. And he said, "Tell me about it. What do you like to play?" And we talked and we talked and we talked. And my mother finally figured out where I was and came over and got me. And I got his autograph, which I promptly lost. But I think I think between Van Cliburn and Steve McQueen and Orson Welles and everybody in between and everybody after, it's like, wow, how fortunate am I?
Yeah.
Pretty fortunate, pretty fortunate. And I'm still here. I'm
Yeah.
still standing or sitting at the moment. And
Working, yeah.
huh?
And still working.
And still working. And yeah, and I think a lot of that work ethic, I already had it because I was always a hard worker. But I really think that Steve inspired me, and because he was the hardest worker you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Just the hardest, and the hardest player you've ever seen. I mean, you know, he took me out in a car one day. Oh my God, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And and this was, you know, in the city. This wasn't on a racetrack, and we were in a Porsche, and he said, "Let's go for a ride." And I was like, "Oh, great, I'm going for a ride. Oh my gosh, sure." And we got in the Porsche, and he was just driving like a very skilled maniac, and just he was an amazing race car driver, amazing driver. And I knew he was looking at me some of the time, you know, to see if he could make me, like, you know, have a heart attack or whatever. He was just like, you know, he'd do a maneuver and look at me, and I would be like pretending like, oh, yeah, that's nothing, you know. In the meantime, am I going to die? And but it was a test. I knew it was a test, and so I showed no fear, even though I was pretty scared, but also thrilled because I really did like fast cars. And I knew I was in good hands because he was a race car driver. You know, he was good at it. It was still really scary though.
Oh, yeah, I would have been scared as well.
Yeah.
But Lee, I mean, I want to thank you for giving me so much time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
This was a real honor for me. And when everything gets resolved, I'd love to have you back on. We could talk more about your career because I mean, you really are a credit to the industry, and what you're doing right now to me is the thing that I think will be your biggest legacy. And I know that's hard to say because you've done so much, but this is really awesome. And I encourage everybody to go check this out. The website is HollywoodRadioPlayers.com. They have a YouTube channel, and it's Two Fat Dogs Entertainment Radio. You can see, and you really have to go see this because I watched about 5 episodes thus far, and I'm hooked. And it's gonna make my time at the gym so much better. So I appreciate that. But thank you again for.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
I really applaud the work that you're doing. So thank you again, Lee.
Thank you very, very much, Mike. It's been really my pleasure.
Well,
and we will talk.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate it. And folks, that's the one and only Lee Purcell for In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. She's Lee Purcell saying good night, everyone.